Your rights are my responsibility. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. And I'm not listening to your stupid classes.
Hello everyone, my name is Bill Roach. It's another episode of Timeless Dialogues, and today we're going to ask this question. Do parents have any authority over their children? Or another way of putting it is, does the state have more authority over your children than you do? And we're all familiar with how this conversation has worked its way out. We understand what's going on in the broader sphere of society right now, where you see education and you see therapy sessions and you see different sort of social events where the state is encroaching over children in particular. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about this issue, and I want to play a clip from John MacArthur to illustrate that issue. And I want to point out one more reference of this by looking at a Fox News article where they specifically show one way in which one governor is trying to take away parental rights over their children. And we all recognize that when the rights of the parent go somewhere else, they typically, and by typically, I mean almost most assuredly, nearly 100% of the time, go to the state. Now, I bring up these different things, and we're all familiar with how education works, but I think a lot of people don't realize how they work in other spheres of life. You know, parents have to deal with a variety of things as it relates to not only what your children learn, but who oversees certain aspects of your child's life. For example, there are many children out there that receive occupational therapy. They're going to receive speech therapy. They're going to receive some kind of other therapy for some deficiency that they have. And that's all good and fine. But what's typically happening is that in the midst of those different therapies, they're getting other forms of therapy given to them, namely the whole sort of industrial complex of the social emotional learning avenue that's been brought in which largely they're trying to give you this whole idea where they're trying to create their perfect society according to their particular understandings of what they want society to be, and they want your children to be prepped/groomed for that particular society. So what we need to look at here is that there are just a few fundamental things before we jump into this video. First and foremost, it's this, is that people need to think about the real causes of all things and the real effects those causes will bring to each sphere of your life. And we all recognize that there are different spheres. There's the government sphere, there's the family sphere, there's the church sphere, but even within your own home, there are different realities that you have to investigate and you have to look at. What's the relationship between the husband and the wife and the husband and the parents and the child? And I will lay my cards out on the table. I'm a complementarian in that regard, as it sort of discusses different gender roles and the roles of the parent and family devotions and so forth. But what we have to also realize is that when we give too much authority from one sphere to another sphere, we're giving up this idea not only of sphere sovereignty, but we're also giving up the rights that are due to that particular sphere, namely the rights of the parents over their children. So I think one of the things we have to see is this, is that fundamental to each of these debates is a proper understanding of who has the authority, where are the boundaries of those particular authorities, and who makes the final call on them. So first and foremost, we recognize this idea that God is above the state. God determines morality because it's based off of his nature, it's expressed in natural law, and it's revealed both in natural law and in his word. But the point is that as Schaeffer used to warn us so well, that if the state becomes ultimate, then the state becomes sort of that ultimate authority in that regard. And so many people, and we recognize this, both Christians and people who are non-Christians, realize that if the state is the final authority, then those declarations that they're making, they're purely arbitrary. Whereas God's nature is unchanging, God's word is unchanging, God's morals are unchanging. And if those are ultimately above the state, then that means the morality that the state must bend its knee to is the absolute morality given by God, revealed in the natural law, as expressed in the word of God. There's no contradiction in between any of those. But in addition to this, we recognize this, that just as God is above the state, the parents are above the children in this regard, which means parents have the God-given role and authority over their children, not the state. It also means that the children don't rule the home. And we realize that there are errors on this happening from both angles of this. You're going to see people whose children just run amok throughout the home and they do whatever they want. And we realize that the proper understanding of authority has just been totally cast out within the family. But what we're also finding is that if parents delegate their authority to the state, then the state ultimately has authority over their children. And that's exactly what the state is trying to do. They want control over these particular organizations and schools, but in particular, your family in general. Now, this is nothing new. We've seen parents delegating their authority for years. For example, how many fathers in particular have delegated the spiritual authority that they have over their family to youth pastors or some kind of mentor in that regard, when the reality of it is that you should be leading your wife and your children in family devotions. You should be leading them in prayer. You should be discipling them. So in one sense, I go, again, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If they're willing to give it up, even in the spiritual things of their family, why would they not do it in other things? Which is really a callback for us to have true reformation within the family. Now, what we recognize is this, is that the net goal, the net effect of what's happened is that when we give up these different spheres of authority to the state, that's exactly why we're in clown world. And we see this. We see that when there's no God over the state has ultimate authority over everything, especially your children. And I think if anything came from sort of like the 2020 and on hiatus that we found ourselves in, and groups such as Moms for Liberty and other parents speaking up to different school boards, it's the fact that when the state has authority over your children, what they're teaching them is not in accordance with what the family would want them to learn, nor is it in accordance with what really just the moral law says that they should learn. And that's why we have a bunch of ticked off parents at school board meetings and in therapy sessions and with doctors saying, you have no authority in this particular sphere. So now what I want to do is I want to pull up a video here real quick by John MacArthur in which he discusses some of this. So we're just going to play it here, make a few comments about what he actually had to say, and then we're going to transition into how this looks within the state of New York on this particular topic.
Families provide a small, sovereign unit that acts as a small barrier against the corruption that seeks to dominate. Shatter the family, destroy the family, and the small sovereign barrier is disintegrated. And by the way, the goal in all of this, you need to be reading to see this, the goal in all of this is not homosexual same-sex marriage. The goal is the total elimination of all marriage, which then means that you don't possess any privacy. You don't have that small sovereign unit, and your children are not yours. They're public children, and they belong to the education system, and they belong to the country, and they belong to the village, but not to you. Families.
So we're all used to hearing about this, and we're all used to seeing this, but let's consider a few of the points that he brings up here. First of all, one of the net effects of what they're trying to do here is that they're trying to say, first and foremost, we see that families are small sovereign units and that families provide a barrier to the outside world. We realize that parents are the protectant to all of the ideologies, both from the academic sphere and practically from just a physical barrier to people who want to do great harm to these particular people. Now, one of the things that we saw when we were doing the marriage amendments back in the day is that when you start to mess with the definition of marriage, that definition can be moldable onto anything that you want it to be. And ultimately what he's talking about is that they want the total destruction of not only families, but marriage in particular. So we're familiar with this. Marriage exists as the union between one man and one union. And one of the net effect goals of that is that it provides the best environment for the nurture and care of children. Now, we could look at each of these, and we saw exactly what was going on years ago when we were lobbying in various states throughout North Carolina, at the federal level and others, is that when you start to play with that definition, in particular, they started to play with the definition of man and woman. And they were calling for this whole issue of same-sex marriage, or so-called same-sex marriage, which is a fundamental redefinition of what marriage is. And we warned then, as we are now seeing in the present, that when you change one of the words, there's nothing to stop you from changing other words in that particular definition. So if marriage exists as the union between one man and one woman, what's to say that we can't start playing with the word one? And that's precisely what you're starting to see here, is that you're starting to see people calling for the expansion of just the idea of monogamy in particular. And we see how this is starting to work in our day and age, is not only have they started to redefine what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what concepts of one mean, but we're also seeing how sort of the critical influx of different ideologies of critical queer theory, critical feminist theory, critical fill in the blank theory have used this in such a way as to totally disrupt and dismantle any stable definition of any particular thing, whether it's gender, marriage, the concept of one, or any other numerical value. But in addition to it, if marriage exists as the union between one man and one woman, and it provides the best environment for the nurture and care of your children, if they can do away with the first proposition, they can definitely do away with the later proposition. And that's precisely what's going on. When you look at the different aspects of what education has turned into, John MacArthur is exactly right. They want you to have public children for the particular village. Or another way of putting it is that they want Hegel's new totalitarian society, and they want to fill it with Hegel's new totalitarian children, in which they have total control, not only just on what they do, but in how they think. In fact, when you look at the various ways that this has worked about with different types of revolutions, it's interesting to see that people within like communist China in particular, and we see how that's happening in other parts of the world now, is that they were groomed in such a way so that when these revolutions take place, they didn't just walk into them, they readily fought for them. And that's precisely what's going on now. You know, you talk to these different parents and they're like, you know, we got the furries within our school. We've got, which are people like dressing up like dogs, thinking that they're dogs, identifying as animals in various respects. In fact, I know somebody who said that their kid has to go to the restroom and there's a litter box that's inside of there. Tell me that's not grooming. Seriously. But in addition to it, what we find is that they're trying to create a unstable society with people who are groomed to bring about the revolution that they want to see take place. Now, that's why he keeps talking about this, is that MacArthur is right when he talks about the goal of all of this is not just the sexual revolution. They want to do away with the very concepts of marriage in particular. And, you know, people sometimes harp on when we get on, oh, this word definition or that word definition. But how many of you have noticed that even within the church, even within conservative circles, we've stopped saying, this is my husband, or this is my wife, or this is my spouse, to saying things such as, this is my partner, my life partner, whatever phrase they want to use like that. Notice this, words have meaning. Words have true intended consequences, and whoever defines the dictionary ultimately is dictating so much about the conversation that is taking place. And when we switch this from marriage exists as the union between one man and one woman, and this is my husband or this is my wife, to this is my partner, we've done nothing more than make it just a social union. Nothing more, nothing less. But what they want to do is they want to disrupt, dismantle, and replace the traditional concepts of both the family and marriage and authority of children within that marriage. Namely, they want to give that over to the state. So ultimately at this point, what we see is this entails the removal of all privacy, both between a husband and a wife and over their children. And it means that the children ultimately belong to the state. Now, I want to transition here and I want to illustrate this very quickly. Now, one of the things, if I could ever make one update with OBS, is that I would want to be able to have two screen shots of which I can edit it right there. But again, here we go. Bear with me. So when you look at this, the title of this is New York Ballot Initiative could block parents from say in child's trans surgery. Critics warn in fiery campaign. So what's happening here is that in the state of New York, their governor is calling for the parents to no longer have the right to say, no, my child won't go through this surgery, or they won't go on these puberty blockers, or no, you're not going to pump them with different types of hormones. They're wanting to say that if the parent tries to get involved in this, one, the parent is wrong, and two, the parent has no authority over the child. And when you look through the article here, it says this: a New York ballot initiative, which means that they're going to bring this up for a vote, the Equal Rights Amendment is facing fierce backlash over its vague language that critics say could prevent parents from having a say on whether their children undergo gender reassignment surgery. Quote, any decent lawyer will take one look at the Proposition 1 language and say, you've got to be kidding me, Greg Garvey, the executive director of the Coalition to Protect Children, New York group. Quote, he says, dedicated to defending the so-called Equal Rights Amendment, said in a press statement provided to Fox News Digital. Now, one of the things that I've realized is that I've worked on these types of amendments, not in this direction, but in the direction of preserving the fundamental definition of marriage. And what we have to realize is that when these different amendments go onto ballots, first of all, there's obviously a lot of debate on them, but it's fundamentally setting a public record by vote before the people that will have years of consequences for what it means to raise children or be married or whatever it is. And the reality is that when they go into place, it's very difficult to undo those particular amendments. In fact, they would have to go all the way through the legislative process. In addition, you'd also have to have a particular election on it again. Now, I always kind of give this joke whenever the election season comes up. I'm like, if you ever see a bill that says, hey, we want to raise your taxes to build this park or add this thing within society, I always say vote no, because once they start it, it's very difficult to undo it, and they will tax the ever-living daylights out of you for years to come and longer than they said that they were going to. Similarly, this is exactly what happens with these different types of ballot initiatives. It's not just the language that's in there that concerns me. It's the way that they're going to mold that language through particular lawyer talk in the years to come and through the already set ways in the judicial understandings of how they're going to work it through the different circuits in that particular arena. That's why he goes on to say this ballot initiative is written so broadly and so poorly that it could cause irreparable harm to children and families. This is no soft sounding equal rights amendment. It's nothing less than the Parents Replacement Act. And that's precisely what John MacArthur was warning about. And this is precisely what I'm warning about, is that when the state becomes the authority over your children, it means the parents no longer have authority over your children. Now, notice what it goes on to say. It says the New York legislature passed the Equal Rights Amendment in January 2023, bringing the amendment to voters on the November ballot this year for ratification. Democrat Governor Kathy Hochul celebrated its passage last year, adding that New York would, quote, combat discrimination and protect abortion access. Notice this, they're already broadening exactly what this ballot initiative is already about, following the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which ended the recognition of a constitutional right to abortion. And one of the fundamental things that we have to say, and it's funny because people are oddly criticizing me in this regard now, there are no moral rights for a moral wrong. Abortion is a moral wrong, period. This whole issue of transgenderism is a moral wrong, and there should be no constitutional right for moral wrongs for the fundamental reason that there are no moral rights for moral wrongs. Now, it goes on to say this, and this is coming here, it says, here in New York, we will continue to take bold measures to protect the rights of New Yorkers, and I applaud the New York State Legislature for taking another crucial step towards enshrining the Equal Rights Amendment into the state constitution. Last year, I was proud to convene the extraordinary session, which means they're intentionally bringing this about, which means that they called a specific session for this particular purpose, which means ideologically they are driven to go out of their way in order to bring this about, of the legislature that led to first passage of this historic amendment. And I'm grateful the amendment is on its way to being presented to voters next year. The proposal will reportedly codify abortion rights in the state constitution and add constitutional protection to already existing protections regarding race and religion. But it's not just that. It goes on to say, critics, however, say the proposal's language is broad and would open the door to parents being kept in the dark over their children's medical procedures, including gender reassignment surgery. Now, it goes on to say this, whether through Albany sloppiness or pernicious ideological intent, Proposition 1 would strip the legal rights of parents and school-aged children to know about crucially important things happening with their children, including controversial gender transformation procedures. Quote, the Coalition to Protect Children and Kids said this in a statement provided to Fox News. Let's keep going here. The ballot proposal will ask New York voters this November if they support adding language to the state constitution, strengthening that people cannot be denied rights based off of their ethnicity, national origin, age, discrimination, or sex, which includes sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcome, and reproductive health care and autonomy. And this is one of the things that I want you to see, and we could keep going on this article, but I think you get the whole point. Years ago, when we said this, if you can play with the definition of marriage and you can play with the definition of man and woman, then what's to stop you from playing with the definition of one man and one woman? And also, what's to stop you with playing with the definitions of other aspects of marriage exists as the union between one man and one woman, for it provides the best place for the nurture and admonition of children. Similarly, in this regard, if they're able to broadly redefine one of these particular terms, namely the concepts of rights and constitutional rights, what's to stop them from broadly redefining or setting words to be so vague to be left up to a lawyer or a judge at a later date regarding sexuality in order to fundamentally and ideologically reshape what it means to have parental rights and what the concept of sexuality even has historically meant. And that's why when you look at so many of the debates that have taken place on this particular issue, one of the things that you have to see, and we saw this as it brought before the Supreme Court, where have we ever seen this understanding of sexuality in the history of the West before? Seriously, go back 50 years, go back 100 years, you don't see it. You see it with the inroads of critical Marxist ideologies as it's being applied to the whole issue of sexuality and the idea of the queering of society and transgenderism. You see the whole point? My point is this, is that if they can fundamentally redefine any one of those words, they can redefine all of those words. And that's why this is so important. So the reason that we bring this up is, one, we want to sort of elevate this particular issue. But I also say now is the time for you to stand up for your children. You have authority over your children. You have authority over your family. Don't let them redefine what it means to have authority. Don't let them redefine what it means to be a parent. Don't let them redefine what it means to have, the identity of being a man or a woman, or what sexuality means in this particular regard. Because again, we don't play soft on these. We take hard stances, we make clear lines, we take bold actions, and we make bold moves as it relates to this. So now is the time, if you live in the state of New York, to get out and vote against it and ask people to vote against it. Stand up against it. Because once this thing has been put in place, it's going to be very, very difficult to undo. You want a case point, an example? How many little parks have you voted in over the years throughout this? Or how many little legislative things have you put in about raise my taxes here and raise my taxes there? And you know what? They never go away. And if you think that it's bad to have to pay, an extra 3 cents on the dollar for a property tax for the next 20 years, try dealing with the net outcomes of this as it works its way through all of your schools, throughout all of your organizations, throughout your fundamental court systems, and so much more. So again, we stand up for that which is right. We stand up for that which is true. We stand up for that which is good, true, and beautiful. We stand up for the things that God has revealed. And God has said, in the beginning, he created them male and female. And God gave us marriage. God gave us the marriage that exists as the union between one man and one woman. And it properly defines what a child is, what a man is, what a woman is, period. So again, thank you for listening to this. If this is something that you find helpful, please like, subscribe, and share.
Your rights are my responsibility. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. I'm not listening to your stupid clauses.